Raiders training camp is open, and I want to be straightforward with you about what is actually coming out of that facility right now, because the details deserve more than the usual August optimism treatment. Every team generates warmth in the preseason. Every fan base finds reasons to believe in July. That seasonal hope is real, and I understand it, but it is not what I am talking about. What is emerging from Las Vegas in these early camp days is specific in a way that the generic version of training camp positivity never is. The details have texture. They point somewhere identifiable. And if you are paying attention to the right things rather than just the surface temperature of the coverage, the story being told about this franchise and about Fernando Mendoza in particular is worth sitting with carefully before the regular season arrives and the complexity of what they are building gets buried under weekly results. Let me start at the center of everything, because that is where any honest evaluation of this roster has to begin. Mendoza, the quarterback, the first overall pick, the player around whom every other decision on this roster was made this offseason and will be made for the foreseeable future. What is being reported from the early days of camp is not the organizational spin that gets applied to every young player in every position room every August. It has and it points toward a player who is already doing something in that building that matters beyond the physical measurements and the drill performances. The physical picture is worth establishing clearly because it anchors everything else. 6 feet 5 inches, north of 230 on the scale. That is the kind of frame that allows a quarterback to see over the interior defensive line, rather than having to navigate around it, to absorb the incidental contact that happens inside every pocket without flinching and abandoning the structure prematurely, and to keep his eyes moving through progressions downfield while pressure is arriving rather than immediately pulling the ball down and treating every pass rush as an emergency. The arm, which carried skepticism during the pre-draft evaluation cycle, is reportedly landing above what those skeptics projected. Not a deep ball artist in the sense of making throws that leave people shaking their heads, but a quarterback who can drive the football into every window that Clint Kubiak's system is designed to create, with timing, with authority, with the velocity that makes route concepts function correctly when the ball arrives where it is supposed to arrive. That is operational arm strength. That is what the system needs, and the early read from camp is that it is present. The Darnold-Goff comparison being circulated in evaluative circles is a useful starting reference point, but I want to be deliberate about where I apply it. The physical elements, Darnold's athleticism, and Goff's frame describe real aspects of Mendoza's profile. What the Darnold parallel actually illuminates most usefully, though, is the critical importance of situational fit for a quarterback's developmental trajectory. Darnold in New York was a cautionary story that nearly ended a legitimate career before it had genuinely been allowed to develop. The same player in Minnesota became something entirely different, not because he was transformed as a human being or a football player, but because the infrastructure around him finally aligned with what his game required to function at its actual level. Mendoza does not have to wait for that alignment to find him later in his career. He is stepping into it on day one. The coaching is built for what he does. The system matches his operational strengths. The organizational commitment to his development exists and is visible in how every roster decision this offseason has been made. That context changes the projection for his career in fundamental ways that the physical comparisons alone cannot capture. Now, I want to slow down on something specific, because I think it reveals more about who Fernando Mendoza actually is than any arm velocity reading or combine number can communicate. He was invited to attend the White House ceremony for the Indiana National Championship team during training camp. He is the first overall pick in the NFL draft. He is 22 years old. His name is at the center of the football conversation. The platform and the celebration were right there in front of him, and his response to that moment was to stay at the facility, take extra repetitions, and keep absorbing the playbook. I want you to understand what that choice actually represents, because it is easy to hear it and process it as a nice story about work ethic and then move on. Nobody on a coaching staff pulls a first overall pick aside and tells him he is obligated to skip a White House invitation to throw roots in the Nevada heat. That decision is made internally. It reflects a player who, at 22 years old, has an unusually clear and honest understanding of exactly where he stands in his development and what this specific moment genuinely requires of him, independent of what might generate more attention or more recognition or more immediate validation from the outside world. That kind of internal priority management is not something you develop through media training. It is either present in a competitor's makeup or it is not. In Mendoza's case, it is clearly present, and it is going to matter over the course of a long season in ways that are impossible to precisely quantify, but entirely real in their competitive impact. The pre-practice preparation detail adds another layer to this picture. Both Mendoza and center Tyler Linderbaum are new additions learning this offense simultaneously from the foundation up. Building a quarterback-center working relationship takes real time and real repetitions, because the communication involved, the physical timing of the exchange, the cadence cues, the pre-snap adjustments that happen wordlessly between those two positions, cannot be installed through conceptual discussion alone. It has to be built through accumulated physical reps in conditions that approximate the real thing. Mendoza is not waiting for the official practice schedule to start building those reps. He is on the field before the formal sessions begin, working through snaps both under center and from the shotgun specifically to accelerate the development of that connection with Linderbaum. That is targeted preparation aimed at a specific gap that Mendoza identified independently and decided to address before anyone asked him to. That is not a player surviving training camp. That is a player trying to compress his own developmental timeline by investing in the work before the investment is officially required of him. The quarterback competition question deserves honest treatment, so let me give it that rather than the emotionally convenient version. Kirk Cousins is currently tracking toward the Week 1 starting job based on what camp is showing. That is the straightforward report. And before that information produces a reflexive reaction in either direction, I want to make the actual case for why the nuanced version of this decision is more significant than the binary version most people default to when discussing it. The historical record of what happens to young quarterbacks who get thrown into full starting responsibility before the conceptual foundation is genuinely solid is not ambiguous. The players who were asked to carry full offensive weight before they were structurally ready to carry it make up a significant portion of the careers that ended earlier than the original evaluation suggested they should. The damage accumulates in specific ways, compensatory decision-making patterns that develop from operating behind inadequate protection, risk-averse habits that form when a young quarterback learns unconsciously that holding the ball and hoping for something to develop is safer than trusting the design and committing. The erosion of the mechanical foundation that comes from repeatedly having to adapt around structural failures rather than executing within a functioning system. Darnold nearly became a permanent member of that damaged group. The decision to protect Mendoza from that category of early career harm by allowing an experienced quarterback to absorb the initial turbulence while the surrounding infrastructure continues developing is a defensible football argument. I take it seriously. But here is where I want to be completely clear about my actual position because I think it matters. If Mendoza goes through the full competitive evaluation of training camp and demonstrates to this coaching staff that he has the system command and the competitive readiness to start from week 1, then the decision has to be to put him out there. And the organizational commitment behind that decision has to be real and sustained, not a 5-game trial. Not 3 rough outings and a quiet shift back to the veteran. A genuine, durable commitment of minimum 10 games before any meaningful reevaluation of whether the decision was correct. Young quarterbacks do not develop inside panic windows. The damage done to developing passers inside panic windows is documented and consistent and underestimated by organizations that allow external pressure to compress their decision timelines beyond what honest development requires. The difference between the quarterbacks who fulfill their evaluations and the ones who fall short of them is often not talent. It is whether the organization around them had the courage and the patience to protect the developmental process through the early adversity that every starter faces in every season. If Las Vegas truly believes in what they selected first overall, the most important proof of that belief is how they behave when the first 3 games are difficult, because they will be difficult. They always are. The secondary transformation happening simultaneously on the other side of the ball is one of the most genuinely important and least discussed stories of this entire Raiders rebuild, and it deserves real dedicated attention rather than a footnote acknowledgement. Jermaine McCollum is practicing. His knee is holding up under the actual workload of training camp. The athleticism that produced consensus first-round evaluations before the injury entered the picture is visible on the practice field and reportedly matching the pre-injury tape in the ways that matter for projecting what he can become as a professional. There are legitimate evaluators in this league who believed McCollum was the most probable candidate to be the first cornerback off the board in this draft class if he had stayed healthy through his college season. The Raiders got him at pick 101. I want that to land with its full weight. A player carrying first-round talent evaluation, available in the 4th round because medical concerns created market inefficiency around him, and he is practicing in full and responding well to the competitive demands of camp. If his knee continues to hold and his development proceeds on the trajectory the early evidence suggests, the Raiders are looking at a player who provides first-round caliber production at a 4th-round acquisition cost. That is the mechanism through which smart franchises create the structural competitive advantages that translate into winning games in October and November. Stokes is generating early buzz for reasons that are specific rather than general, and the specificity is what makes it meaningful. The combination of genuine speed, physical willingness to fill gaps and support the run aggressively, and the lateral athleticism to operate effectively in coverage when assignments require it, that combination at the box safety position has been a structural vulnerability for this defense across multiple seasons. The Raiders have possessed real edge rushing capability. They have had moments of interior defensive line quality that produce disruption. What they have consistently lacked is the hybrid safety profile that completes the architecture, that provides the run containment toughness and the coverage athleticism simultaneously to make the rest of the defensive structure function at the level the individual pieces suggest in isolation. Stokes reads as a genuine answer to that specific structural need, and the early camp evaluation appears to be confirming what the tape suggested about him. But here is the dimension of the secondary transformation that I keep returning to because I do not think it receives adequate analytical attention. Maxx Crosby has been one of the most impactful and productive edge rushers in this entire league for years. Not one of the most impactful in the AFC West or in a particular era or under a particular coaching staff. In the league, consistently. And he has produced that level of individual performance while operating behind a secondary that gave opposing quarterbacks a rational and often successful alternative to holding the ball and absorbing his pressure. When a quarterback understands that scrambling away from the edge rush and throwing into coverage behind the pass rush carries a reasonable probability of success because the corners are not going to consistently win their contested situations, the disruption that Crosby generates gets structurally neutralized before it can fully express itself in outcomes. He wins the rush, the quarterback escapes, the coverage gives up a completion, and the statistical record of one of the best pass rushers in football systematically understates what he is actually doing on the field. The past season's numbers are not the ceiling of what Crosby can produce when the architecture around him is complete. They are a floor that was artificially constrained by the absence of the secondary quality that makes edge rushing truly devastating. For the first time in his professional career, that secondary quality appears to be arriving alongside him in Las Vegas simultaneously. What that combination produces across a full season is something the statistics from any of his previous campaigns cannot fully predict because the conditions have never been aligned the way they appear to be aligning right now. The roster competition below the established depth chart at receiver involves real battles with genuinely uncertain outcomes, and those battles will shape what the offense can do in the specific game situations that determine close game outcomes across the course of a season. The running back group has a clear primary option in Mike Washington, whose athleticism testing placed him among the most physically gifted players at his position in recent combine history. Surrounded by depth pieces who bring different and complementary functional contributions rather than just roster filler, the defensive line rotation has an established structure at its top with real competition for the roles beneath it that will continue developing through preseason evaluation. None of these battles is fully resolved, and none should be treated as such before the preseason games provide the actual competitive evidence that shorts and helmets camp work cannot substitute for. The overarching question that everything else in this training camp evaluation eventually reduces to is a simple one. Is the organizational commitment to the vision being constructed in Las Vegas deep enough to sustain itself through the genuine difficulty that all rebuilding franchises face when the games start carrying real consequences? The evidence assembled in these early days of camp suggests the answer is yes. But evidence from training camp is preliminary by nature, and the real answer only gets revealed when the schedule starts and the pressure becomes actual. What I can say with confidence is that the specific details coming out of that facility, The quarterback's daily choices about where to invest his preparation time, the secondary transformation beginning to take shape, the philosophical coherence between the coaching infrastructure and the players being developed inside it, these are not the details of a team performing optimism for an August audience. These are the details of a franchise executing a plan with genuine structural integrity underneath it. Those two things feel similar from the outside in July. By November, the difference between them is impossible to miss.